Welcome to the Rest is Politics Question Time with me, Rory Stewart.
And with me, Alastair Campbell. So where do you want to start, Rory?
So, Alastair, yes, lots of things to talk about, interesting news from all around the world. Austria, Switzerland, Sri Lanka. I'm going to start you on Austria. Lucy Archbold. Election campaigning has been paused in Austria due to the recent catastrophic floods. Can you please offer some insight into what this means in practice ahead of the upcoming election? Alastair.
Well, the election is very, very soon, later this month. And, we talked about it briefly a couple of weeks ago. It's an election where the far right looks like it could end up in government. And I think the floods, Lucy, are having an impact because anybody who's been following the floods, not just in Austria, but in Hungary and parts of Italy and all sorts of different parts of Europe, truly horrific, including in big cities like Vienna, where they thought they had sort of, pretty well perfected flood protection. And there has been loss of life, there's been massive loss of property, there's been incredible costs, and the clear up operation is still going on. And the reason why I think it is having some impact in the upcoming election is because, like a lot of these far right parties, including Trump, including Reform Party here, there is this sort of, climate crisis denialism that goes on. And the Austrian far-right parties, and indeed the not-so-far-right parties, have been very much part of that sort of, climate crisis is overblown, people can't afford it, all the sort of, popular stuff that's attached to that. And what this has done really has made the public, I think, more alert to the issue. And it's changed the nature of the debate. So whether it will fundamentally affect the outcome, I don't know. But what I would say is, Lucy, I think it might. Let's stick with another election, Rory.
Yep.
Other big news this week. This is from Dave Tunbridge. What are your thoughts on the results of the Sri Lankan election and what this means for the country going forward in the wake of their recent economic crisis? And this was quite a big upset, this one.
This is amazing. So this is in Sri Lanka. People will remember, many people remember anyway, a couple of years ago, the great ruling dynasty of Sri Lanka was basically collapsed when Rajapaksa fled. And you might remember images of the public breaking into his palace and kind of using his kitchen and stuff. Presidential elections come out of that. And AKD, who is the leader of the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party, the JVP, has swept to an extraordinary election victory, picking up about 6% of the vote on a turnout of 80%. Huge upset, both for, of course, the old ruling dynasty, an upset for the caretaker government that's been in place, but also a remarkable turnaround for a Marxist-Leninist party which in the late 1980s was involved in full-on Marxist-Leninist armed insurrection when he first joined that party, and has now become a party where, even though he, in his campaign, has been a bit critical of the IMF, Sri Lanka has been through a massive economic crisis, partly actually because they tried to go for a radical move to there's a discussion, as you can imagine, about how much of a cause this was, but it was certainly one of the causative factors. They tried to go for a very radical move towards organic farming. And in pushing through fully organic, their agricultural production collapsed. They found themselves on the edge of food shortages, exports collapsed, and that was one of the things that triggered the economic crisis. Anyway, he is an example of something that we see around the world, which is somebody from a very, very radical populist party apparently now moving more to the moderate center, embracing the IMF and presenting himself as the candidate of moderation and good management, with his opponents, of course, saying nothing's changed.
We talked in the main podcast about the current Labour government and how it was going to deal with the difficult economic inheritance. This guy's got an absolute massive problem, and it will be interesting to see how much time people give him to try to sort some of the mess out. It's interesting how much incumbency in so many of these elections does appear to be like a really big problem. I mean, Modi won his election and is still the leader of India, but didn't win nearly as much of the vote as we thought that he would. And here, the incumbent president got 17% of the vote. He was third place, didn't go through to the the runoff in the second count. Interesting, though, I thought he showed a lot of dignity in his kind of handover statement. He said, "With much love and respect for this beloved nation, I hand over its future to the new president." Let's hope that if Donald Trump loses, he can show similar grace.
And a lot of the themes we talk about a lot are going to come through now, because one of them is that he doesn't have any position really in Parliament. They've only got a couple of seats in Parliament. So he's got to
Yeah.
dissolve Parliament in order to try to get parliamentary majority behind him. And I think we do keep, with Georgia Maloney, the question is, has she gone from being a far right politician to a politician of the centre? Can you go from being a Marxist-Leninist student insurrectionist to being a sort of moderate pragmatist?
Mm.
And I guess sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, says he
We
without some great
yeah.
yeah.
We should probably sometime in the near future take a look at Milei in Argentina, because I think it's about a year now since he,
Oh, that's a great subject. We've got to do Millet.
yeah.
I have a question for you. Josephine Ampho, Swiss biodiversity. With the climate and biodiversity crises becoming increasingly urgent, why is it that the Swiss public have just rejected a proposal to force authorities to do more to protect natural habitats from pollution development? Was the farming lobby given too prominent a voice in the campaign? There we are, Alastair. Switzerland, which we love.
Well, the government did not back. This is one of those referendums that was happening because, they have this sort of weird system. They have referendums and all sorts of things. And the government wasn't backing it. Most of Parliament wasn't backing it. And I think it does underline this sort of whole nature protection, climate change, the arguments that it might affect the economy, agriculture, construction, and energy production appears to have won out. This was not a close vote. 37%, that's only just over 1 in 3, voted to back the proposal. So this is, I think, part of this sort of the politicization of the whole climate debate. And I think that the sort of those who really believe in the climate catastrophe will be a bit alarmed by this.
Yeah, David Lammy has pushed to really get the UK government, and I admire him for doing this, leaning more not just into climate, but into biodiversity.
Yeah.
And of course, Switzerland is one of many, many countries in the world whose biodiversity is in crisis. British nature is in terrible crisis. I mean, it's been declining dramatically over the last 25 years, but the same is true in Switzerland. And regardless of how people vote, we're going to continue with very, very dramatic biodiversity loss, species loss. But of course, as we've talked about in the pod yesterday, the challenge for Labour is that on the one hand, we're trying to do stuff on biodiversity. On the other hand, they're trying to generate growth. They're trying to get houses built. And those two things will very rapidly find themselves running into conflict with each other.
Just point out, they also had a same day a referendum on pension reform. I'm not going to go into the details because I'm not sure I fully understand them, but that got rejected as well. The other election this week, Rory, that's just worth a mention. The question from Ella here: please, can you provide some insight into the recent election in Brandenburg and whether it was a huge success for the far right AfD? Well, they didn't win. They came second. The SPD, led nationally, federally by Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor, they won, but it was narrow. I don't think we should kid ourselves that it was a total rejection, but I think it certainly sort of gives them a little bit of breathing space. But Scholz is still under quite a lot of pressure as a result of that election.
Phones in Parliament. Digby Walker. Why are MPs allowed to be on their phones in the House of Commons? If you're in the chamber, you're listening and debating. Otherwise, quite frankly, you might as well not be there and be dining in for your home, your constituency.
I know what you think about
Yeah.
this because I've heard you rage
Yeah.
about it many times.
It's ridiculous. There is no possible justification. If we're taking telephones away from children in schools, we should take them away from MPs in the chamber. There's even a very elaborate system of doorkeepers and notes. So you can, if you want to get a message urgently to someone in the House of Commons chamber, you can do so.
Yeah.
But there is absolutely no excuse being in there on your phones. And there's also no excuse for reading speeches. I mean, you and I were sitting down for a couple of hours with Chris Patton, and he was talking about the fact that when he entered the House of Commons, you wouldn't even have been called by the Speaker if you were reading your speech, let alone a question off a sheet of paper.
I can remember when I was a political journalist sitting up in the press gallery, if an MP so much as looked at the back of their order paper that they might just be holding there, and their colleagues started to think they were reading. They were reading, and the Speaker would step in and say, the honourable member knows that he mustn't read from notes. And
goodness.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
you would say, because by the time I got there, I mean, amongst the many turgid, horrible things about the House of Commons chamber, one of them is they were basically just reading out speeches written by some 22-year-old research assistant who'd copied and pasted some nonsense from last week's Economist. and they drone on mispronouncing the names of every person and country in the world.
I think not being allowed notes is excessive. But I think that I do think there's something about the use of phones, and I'll tell you what you know as well. I mean, there may be that people are sort of engaged in sort of researching something that they've just heard or whatever. But the truth is, most of them you can see from the movement of the thumb that they're basically just scrolling through social media, probably to see whether their intervention was sort of getting any coverage or whatever it might be.
Yeah, or looking at pictures of tractors.
That was your what was it? Who was that one? What
That
was he
was Neil
called again?
Parish. He was
Neil
whose
Parish.
defense was when he was found looking at pornography in the House of Commons chamber, said that he was trying to go for a website on tractors. He was a farmer.
Yeah, we obviously believed that excuse, didn't we? Milo, here's another one. I'm interested in the subject of political leaking. Why do people leak? What happens if you are caught leaking?
Oh, tell us about that, Alistair, because that's something that is a bit weird. I didn't do it. Even when I was in the cabinet, I didn't do it. And I'm very conscious, though, that my more wily colleagues would point out to me when we looked at newspapers that there would be descriptions of cabinet meetings I'd been in, where for some reason it would turn out that all the really good points were being made by Liz Truss, or all the really good points were being made by Gavin Williamson. In fact, it would give the impression that Gavin Williamson or Liz Truss had spoken for about 90% of the cabinet meeting, given the amount of coverage to their comments. And this is something you must have been aware of, because I think you suspected Charlie Whelan of doing it. Is that right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Tell us who Charlie Whelan was quickly. Sorry, I know you don't want to get dragged back into this stuff.
He was Gordon Brown's press guy. And look, I think you've got to be careful with this stuff. I mean, to me, a leak is where there is a piece of government information that is not been published and which you deliberately and willfully, for whatever reasons, put out into the public domain to a journalist. Okay, that's a leak. I think it's different. You say you never leaked, but you will have had conversations with journalists and who will have picked up on things you said and will have sort of picked up on tone and so forth, and then they sort of take that away. And I think that's different. I think what often people talk about when they talk about leaking, they actually mean that politicians have talked to journalists, or civil servants or special advisors have talked to journalists. And so I think you've got to differentiate.
There's sort of three things, aren't there? There's the genuine breaking state secrets, which is what Gavin Williamson lost his job over. He was
Yeah,
accused after an investigation by Mark Sebel of having revealed a debate about Huawei in the National Security Council so
yeah,
that he could appear in newspapers. The second one is your very mild thing. You happen to talk
gossip.
to a journalist or give a bit of gossip. But the third thing, which is something that I hate, which is the sense that there's a sort of agreement from the journalists that if you will be very indiscreet with them, they'll write you up as a great coming figure. And that was Liz
Mm,
Truss's trick. The reason she was
mm.
always written up as the future leader of the Conservative Party is that in exchange, she would give all this information to journalists over lunch. And I was talking to a US congressman on this. He was approached by the political editor of probably the most prestigious newspaper in the United States, who asked him to turn on his phone and record a private conversation between members of the US Congress and President Biden, members of the same party, the conversation in which they were trying to persuade President Biden to step down. And this guy said to the political editor, "You've got to be out of your mind. I'm not going into a meeting with my own party leader with a phone on the table recording a complete transcript of it," and refused to do it. Sure enough, 2 days later, he looks at the newspaper and one of his colleagues has done it.
Wow.
The newspaper's got a full transcript of the conversation between the MPs and the congressman and Biden. And sure enough, again, that congressman is then rewarded by being written up as one of the future rising stars of the party.
Wow, wow. That sort of thing does go on. You've got to be very, very careful. It's why I always say to people, in government, life is on the record. You never quite know who's watching. You never quite know who's listening. You shouldn't be paranoid, but you should understand that an awful lot of people are out to get you. The question there, what happens if you're caught leaking? Most leak inquiries go nowhere. Most leak inquiries lead to lots of energy being wasted. I think that you get a sense over time of whether people can be trusted. And I think within any given organization, if the judgment is reached that somebody cannot be trusted, then you have to get rid of them.
Were you ever unfair? Because I know that there was always, when I was a minister, there were always rumours that certain people leaked all the time.
Yeah.
So it was Liz Truss, Gavin Williamson, I think more recently Kemi Badenoch is accused of being an inveterate leaker.
Yeah.
It could never quite be proven, and they themselves denied it. but
Mm.
everybody in number 10 was absolutely certain. um, when do you think when the number 10 press people are very certain that these people are leaking, they usually are pretty certain about it, or are they sometimes unfair in accusing people of leaking who aren't leaking?
I'll give you a very good example of when I was unfair, and it relates to phone hacking. And this is why the phone hacking thing was so sort of insidious, and frankly, why I wish that the Leveson inquiry had been properly and fully implemented. And I was unfair to Carol Kaplan, who was a close friend of Cherie. Lots of stuff started appearing in the papers that I thought could only be coming from her. But of course, subsequently, I realised it was all coming. It was coming through phones being hacked. That was a time of being unfair with politicians. I mean, politicians will. I think you over time you get a sense of who you can trust, um, and you get a sense of people that you're still willing to sort of treat with, even though you might have a few suspicions that they're putting stuff out there. But I guess what's going on at the moment within the Number 10 operation. We didn't talk on the main podcast about Sue Gray, but there's no doubt in my mind that there are people inside the system, including, I'm afraid, civil servants, who are trying to do her in, and they're feeding stuff out about her. And I think that is just wrong.
I noticed that because I noticed that I think it was the Daily Mail had managed to get a photograph which somebody inside number 10 had used their phone to take out of a window of Sue Gray
Yeah,
having
that's
a
actually
row with a.
wrong. I saw that and was utterly
Yeah,
horrified. So I looked into it. It wasn't taken in the garden. It was taken. When you're walking up Downing Street, as you
yeah,
look after you go past the sort of number 9 Downing
yeah,
Street, and then there's a gap where sometimes cars park, and there's a little bit of grass there. There's a little smaller garden there,
yeah.
and that's where and it was taken by a photographer walking up the street who spotted Sue
My
Gray.
goodness, right. And that produced a story about her having a massive row with a member of the Permanent Civil Service.
A blazing row, which turns out to be complete bollocks. The photographer took the picture, gave it to the Mail, and they then set, I can't remember who it was, Pierce or Letts or one of those people to sort of, build an entire kind of fiction around it based on the fact that the photographer said she looked really angry and she stormed off. Apparently, so that's going to happen.
Yeah,
No, I think if somebody, there's a very good example. If it had been
yeah,
somebody taking a picture inside Downing Street of goings on in the garden, as happened during COVID to the Tories, if you
yeah,
remember,
yeah,
that picture of them all sort of
yeah.
lounging around. That is unforgivable, and that is worth trying to find out who is doing that.
And I mean, I think this is an important thing that we didn't touch on the podcast. It's a machinery of government points. So when David Cameron came in, he was very lucky to have inherited Jeremy Hayward, who was
Yeah,
this big figure running the civil service, but
yeah.
who'd been there all the way through from John Major right through Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and so on. This is not the case at the moment. What's happened is Keir Starmer is coming in, and I think it's one of the things that's causing a problem for him. His cabinet secretary, Simon Case, who was appointed by Boris Johnson when he was very young, and has been off on medical leave, so I think hasn't been in the office as much as people would hope, doesn't seem to have the trust of the incoming administration, but equally isn't going anywhere. So they've got a sort of slight feeling that they may have a lame duck right at the heart of their civil service machine, who they don't fully trust and who doesn't trust them. They've brought in Sue Gray as the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who was a very senior civil servant. And there's been this odd conversation around how much she's paid, where again, it seems as though it was a bit of a mistake, because if she'd just been paid a few £1,000s less, they wouldn't have been able to run the story she's paid more than the Prime Minister. And I don't know why she did that, to be honest. It doesn't seem to me rocket science to think you might keep your salary just under the PM's if it's only a few £1,000s difference.
Although there are plenty of precedents, by the way.
There are plenty of precedents, people being paid more
And,
than
and
much
also,
petrol. Yeah.
also, she doesn't set her own pay. I think this goes back to some of the stuff we talked about in the podcast. There are plenty of examples you could have dug up from our time and also from the recent Conservative government where that was not an issue. It became an issue because at the moment there is a sort of get Sue Gray thing going on, and I think the important thing to bear in mind on that, and I remember this is something that gave me a lot of strength when I was getting, and I think Sue is to some extent playing the role that I played in terms of being the one that the press really want to try and get. And Tony Blair, I remember once taking me one side when I was really under the cosh and saying, "Listen, is this stuff getting to you?" And I said, "No, not really." And he said, the important thing to understand is they're doing this to you because they know that you're important to me and they're trying to take you out. And if they take you out, then they'll move on to the next one. So as long as you understand that and you've fully got my backing in everything you do, and I think that's kind of a part of what's going on now. Added to which, there will be people in the civil service who don't like the fact that Sue Gray went off and became a Labour Party person and is now back, in a very, very senior position. And there may be some Labour people. I keep reading, by the way, this is where journalists just sort of repeat their own stuff. I keep reading that the problem is Morgan McSweeney, the kind of political strategist, and Sue Gray not getting on. I know them both and have talked to them both, and I don't think that is where the problem lies. I really don't. I think there are other people in there who are just sort of feeding out stuff because that's how they get their kicks. Now, when that happens, find out who they are and get them out of the system. That is the only way to deal with this nonsense.
Home birth advice. Georgia, I'm 7 months pregnant, planning a home birth. After hearing briefly about midwife Rory delivering his baby at home, I'd appreciate any tips. I definitely would not come to me for tips. The key thing, obviously, is that the work in delivering a baby was done by my wife, Shoshana. All I was really doing was following the instructions down 999 in my ear in a very easy birth. But it is a lovely thing if it works. I mean, take medical advice and work out what your risk level is. If it does work, it is a really lovely thing because we didn't have to go into hospital at all. Sasha was born here and Shoshana was back in bed, our own bed, couple of minutes after the baby was born, and Sasha never had to go into the hospital. And it was lovely to be able to spend those first few days not in that sort of institution environment, but in your home. So it's a lovely thing if you're able to do it.
Now, Rory, you mentioned Sasha there. I got lobbied last night. Doesn't happen to me very often. I'm normally unlobbyable.
Yeah.
But it was somebody who'd been listening to our conversation about social media. And
oh God, you're not being lobbied by another one of your mates and social media company. This is going to be another
Snapchat.
Oh my Lord!
And they gave me this for you to go through with your kids. Okay.
Yeah. Go on.
Parents' Guide to Online Safety. There you are.
Blimey, I can't believe you fell for that.
I haven't fallen for anything.
What's going to happen next? You're going to be taking stuff from TikTok on guides to how to avoid foreign interference in social media.
I haven't fallen for anything. I'm just telling you.
Then you're going to be sharing, Facebook's guide to political
Rory,
harmony.
I remain of the view that social media was a good thing at the start and has morphed in many places, especially X, and to some extent TikTok as well, into a bad thing for our politics.
Well, when you mentioned Facebook, Facebook's a big problem.
Facebook is a massive problem, and it's the reason why I'm no longer on it. I'm on it, but it's mordant. I don't use it at all.
Very good.
And as you know, I'm thinking of coming off X, but I keep being told by our listeners that I shouldn't do that.
Jacob Harris, question for you. The annual Labour Party conference karaoke has produced some excellent social media clips in recent years. So I was wondering if either of you have a go-to karaoke song or any memories of politicians giving iconic conference karaoke performances. Are you good at karaoke? You must be. You quite like singing, don't you? You and I were singing hymns together in Lambeth Palace with the Archbishop yesterday.
Yeah, we were. That was quite nice, wasn't it?
That was good. I thought you had quite a nice voice. That was good.
Thank you. I noticed, by the way, that you when you're doing the prayers thing, you speak in a very, very kind of formal way. Is that are you fearing God?
I think it's probably that what you're seeing there is you're seeing my sort of formal childhood voice preserved in some weird way in a church context. And this strange transatlantic drawl that I've developed is a later phenomenon. You're getting a glimpse.
It is not there at all. You sound like
a posh English person. Yeah.
Very, very. Yeah. And by the way, I noticed you didn't seem to know, as I did, that if there's a red dot at the end of a line of one of the Psalms, you have to have quite a long pause.
Oh, that was very good.
Did you not know that? Did you not know that?
No.
Anyway,
no.
Karaoke.
I love the way you're now posing as a kind of expert on church ritual.
By the way,
I'm gonna take your opinion on karaoke, but less your opinion on church ritual. Go on, tell us about your favorite karaoke song.
Thank you for the music, ABBA.
That's the go-to. That's what you do.
Because what's so wonderful about it is you have the slow start. I'm nothing special. In fact, I'm a bit of a bore, and you go on for that, and then you get to the booming bit. I actually do quite a lot of karaoke on my own without a karaoke machine in my bathroom.
Oh well, Well, I guess bathrooms good, aren't they? The good sort of
Oh,
echo qualities.
oh yeah. That's where I practice my bagpipes, in the bathroom.
Oh, ouch! That can't be
Yeah.
good for your hearing. That's
What's your karaoke song when you're out clubbing?
no, 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 no. I sing so badly out of tune. I can only sing decently if I've got someone next to me who's holding the tune. Otherwise, I change key in a horrible way.
Yeah, I think I was booming out the hymn rather better than you did.
Yeah, yeah. You're definitely much better at music than I am. Okay, now, Tim, what books are you both reading this week? Okay, here are some books I'm reading which I'm loving.
How many
So
books are you reading at once?
I am at the moment, I think, reading 7 books.
Oh, for God's sake, Rory, that's just showing off. I'm reading one book, but it's Der Tod in Venedig. What does that mean?
Uh, Death in Venice,
Well
Thomas
done.
Mann.
Well done.
Oh,
I'm,
that's a
I'm
great
reading.
book.
I'm reading it auf Deutsch.
My goodness, wow, that's serious stuff. I've just been actually reading The Magic Mountain, which I think is just Thomas Mann. Wow, that's I'm very jealous being able to read it.
Now, Rory, I can't believe you. You can't honestly say you can't read 7 books. It's impossible to do that and focus on them and absorb them. And do you ever not finish books?
Yeah, often.
How many of the 7 will you finish?
Ooh, I would say probably 1 out of 7.
Oh wow.
But they're non-fiction books. So let me give you an example of what they are. So I'm reading
Okay.
Penguin History of Latin America, and
Yep.
there I'm particularly interested in the revolutionary moment, so independence. So I'll read the
Yep.
chapters on that, but I probably won't read the most recent bits. I'm reading Ed Conway's Material World, which is a wonderful book looking at the stuff beneath our feet. But there again, I'm particularly interested in his chapters on copper. Isabel Hardman, amazing book on the NHS called Fighting for Life.
Yep. Yeah.
Great book called The Unaccountability Machine, which, if you haven't looked at, is just such a wonderful way of talking about Grenfell and our current world, because it's, as I guess the title tells you all, it's about the way in which as societies have become more complicated.
Mm.
It's very, very difficult to work out who to blame. I've been enjoying a book by Dan David called Lying for Money, about legendary frauds and what they tell us about how the modern world works. And I've also been watching the Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room. If people haven't seen that, so it's an old documentary now, but boy, it's a way of looking into capitalism going wrong. Just wonderful. And then finally, it's something that our more serious readers will know so well and love so much. But The Five Giants by Nick Timmons,
Yeah.
which is an
I've read
account of
that.
the welfare
Yeah.
state.
God, I don't think I've ever read 7 books at the same time. I think I normally read one fiction, one non-fiction, and I have them on the go at the same time.
Well, you are reading in German. I mean, I'm not reading Thomas Mann in German.
Ja, ja,
Yeah.
das ist wahr. Aber ich könnte auch ein anderes Buch lesen. I must. There is a great book. Apparently, one of the books that's doing really, really well in Germany at the moment, which I want to get because Marseille is one of my favorite cities. It's called Marseille, so
Yeah.
that's probably what I'm going to read next. But Rory, let's go a little bit meta. This is my
Yeah.
last question, unless
Yeah.
the producer tells us we've got to keep going. How do you decide pod topics, Dr. Ness? What is the process in releasing your podcast? Who decides the topics for discussion? Do you rehearse the discussions, and who chooses which questions you'll answer?
Well, so we've never really discussed this, so I'll give you my view, and then you give me your view.
Yeah.
My view is the whole thing. On the main pod, we decide what the main 3 or 4 subjects for the week are. So people who listened yesterday would have picked up that we decided the main subjects were Labour and its conference, Lebanon and Israel, and long COVID. And then we'll go and do some research around those things, talk to people. I find it very, very useful having someone to call. I noticed on long COVID, you called a long COVID doctor.
Yeah.
I'll call friends of mine with long COVID, or I'll call a friend in Lebanon to talk about what it's like being in Lebanon. I think in addition to the kind of written research, there's just no substitute for having a go-to person who lives and breathes the subject all the time.
Yeah.
Question time's a little bit more random. I mean, it genuinely is the questions that come flying in.
Mm.
But what's your view of our process?
Yeah, well, the technical answer is that we have a WhatsApp group with us and the producers on it. And we sort of through the week, and especially over the weekend, actually, we'll share quite a lot of thoughts and ideas and links. But basically, you and I decide. It's usually obvious what the main point of discussion is likely to be. But then other times we will do things like we did yesterday with long COVID. That was genuinely driven by people constantly saying, "Why do you never talk about long COVID?" And then for the Q&A, I look at the Twitter ones, but we get them on all the different social media networks. We get them to send directly into restlesspolitics@gmail.com. And then the producers will look through those, and I'll look through the Twitter ones. And then we just sort of, but like today, we haven't told each other what questions we're going to ask. And we never, other than when we're sort of just sitting around talking before an event or something, we never discuss what we're going to say. So I didn't know what you were going to say about Lebanon. You didn't know what I was going to say about the Labour Party. We don't sort of rehearse what we're going to say at all.
Yeah, which I think is probably part of the trick of it. I do love question time. There's so many questions. I mean, we can't get onto them all, and it's sad. But this week we won't be able to do them, but maybe we'll get back to them at some point.
Maybe we should do this one. The Main Man 28. Who is your favourite post-war US president? So this question allows us to plug November the 5th. You and I, Rory, we're heading to the United States. We're going to be joined by Anthony Scaramucci from The Rest is Politics US, Marina Hyde from The Rest is Entertainment, and Dominic Sambrook from The Rest is History. And we're going to take our viewers and listeners through the night as the Americans decide the future of the world. But who's your favourite post-war American president?
Well, the one I know most about is Lyndon Johnson because of those incredible Robert Caro biographies, just taking you through step by step his life. Yeah. It's very difficult not to be in love with Kennedy, despite all that we know about him and all the flaws and scandals. Yeah. And of course, Obama is just so dignified, so smart, so thoughtful. Although I do slightly worry that he was maybe overly micromanaging and overly liable to try to run the presidency through a seminar. Anyway, over to you.
I mean, John Soares, who worked with us in Downing Street, went on to be head of MI6. He always used to take the because he's you and your fondness for Bill Clinton. It's really over the top. But I do absolutely love Bill Clinton. But my favourite post-war American president is, without any doubt, Kamala Harris.
Oh, beautiful. There was I thinking you were going to say Richard Nixon.
It has to be Kamala Harris. Right, Rory, lovely to talk to you as ever.
Lovely to talk to you. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.